Hello anybody, and thanks for tuning in to Monday Morning Handicapping. This is a big race breakdown, and I'm going to be taking a look at the upcoming Belmont Stakes. We're going to go over the race pace and track profile of the previous 11 runnings of the race. I know this year and last year are a little bit different, and we're going to get into that, so let's just get started. A little agenda: we're going to do a brief intro to the Belmont Stakes, then we're going to look at an overview of the numbers for the past 9 runnings. 2 of the years in the past 11 years were a little bit different, and like I said, we will be getting into that. So we're going to take a look at my Google Sheets document, which will be provided in the description below. Take a look at the average race pace for the previous 9 runnings of the Belmont Stakes. I didn't include the 2 off years because one year the scheduling was rearranged a little bit, so it sort of just changed the circumstances. And last year the race was run at a different track, going a different distance, so I didn't want that to skew from the traditional 12 furlong or mile-and-a-half Belmont Stakes. And we're going to gain a general sense of how the races are run and won through several variables, and examine who is winning in conjunction with the new circumstances that I've mentioned. A closer look at each variable with takeaways, provide some potentially key elements when handicapping this year's running, and closing thoughts and wrap up. So the Belmont Stakes, sort of the who, what, where, and why. It's a $2 million purse. The Belmont Stakes is a grade 1, 12 furlong or 1.5 miles. A furlong is an eighth of a mile, so if you do the math, the Belmont Stakes is traditionally a 1.5 mile race on the main dirt track at Belmont Park, which is located in Belmont, New York. The Belmont Stakes is the third leg of the Triple Crown, and it is held 3 weeks after the second leg of the Triple Crown, which is known as the Preakness Stakes. The Triple Crown series is restricted to 3-year-old horses, so every horse only gets one chance to win the Triple Crown, thus amplifying its prestige to become a Triple Crown champion. The Belmont Stakes was first run in 1867 at Jerome Park Racetrack in the Bronx. The race was named after the financier of the construction of Jerome Park Racetrack, August Belmont Sr. The race was first run at Belmont Park in 1905 and has been run at 5 different tracks throughout its history. And Secretariat currently holds the record for the fastest 12 furlong Belmont Stakes with a time of 2 minutes 24 seconds flat in 1973. Now before we go on, I'm just going to give you a look at my Excel or Google Sheets file, just so you can kind of understand where I'm getting all my information from. So here's my Belmont Stakes Google Sheets document. Over on the left column, we have the years of each race in descending order. So these are all the figures for the 2004 race, 2003 race, 2002 race going across. Because the track has changed in recent years and will be the same case this year, I have the tracks listed. So as you can see, it was run at Saratoga in 2024. Every year before that was run at Belmont Park. I have the track conditions here. Every year it has been a fast track. And when we get to this column here, we have quarter mile. So the time set by the leader of each of these races to the quarter mile. We have the LB or lengths back at the quarter mile pole. The eventual winner was how many lengths back at the quarter mile pole. So we'll forget about this pink row where it was run at a different distance. But if we go down to 2023, the eventual winner at the quarter mile pole was 1 length back. The year before that, at the quarter mile pole, the eventual winner was 2 3/4 lengths back, and so on and so forth. Up at the top, we have the averages for all the traditional Belmont Stakes. So on average, the eventual winner of the Belmont Stakes was 3.44 lengths back at the quarter mile pole. Here we have the split, which is the quarter mile time between the previous quarter mile, so from the quarter mile pole to the half mile. How fast was this quarter mile running? Also, we have the rate, which I call the slowdown rate. How much faster or slower was this quarter mile compared to the previous quarter mile? So if we take a look right here, 0.43 seconds. This quarter mile running from the quarter mile to the half mile was 0.43 seconds slower than this quarter mile, 23.63. plus 0.43 seconds gives you this split time going into the half mile. And I have the same thing from the half mile, which was run in 47.69. How far back was the eventual winner at this point? 2.75 or 2 3/4 lengths at the half mile pole. The split from the half mile to the 3/4 mile in this year's running was 24.87, which was 0.81 seconds slower between this split time to the half mile to the 3/4 mile pole. and that goes on throughout the entire race up to the 1.5 miles. Again, in these pink columns, they weren't run at 1.5 miles, so I am not including them in the averages above. I also have the average slowdown rate for the entire race. So if you look at my formula here, you can see it's averaging out every rate for each quarter mile. So on average, how much slower is each quarter mile being running? About a half second 2 years ago, a quarter of a second 3 years ago, and so on. W2W indicates wire-to-wire winner, so how many horses went to the lead early and held on to the lead throughout. We had 2 of them, which equates to 22%. We have the average odds of the eventual winner at 6.05 to 1, but we have the individual odds for each year here. We have the name of the winner of the Belmont Stakes here. We have the post position and the average post position above, average 5.56, but here's each individual post position. I also looked at each horse and looked at what was the last race they ran in before running in the Belmont Stakes. So we have the Grade 1 Kentucky Derby last year. It was an off year, but before that, the Grade 3 Peter Pan, Kentucky Derby the year before that, Kentucky Derby, Florida Derby, and so on. Did those horses win their last race? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 horses out of the last 11 that did win their most recent race before coming into the Belmont Stakes, which is 40%. It's actually out of 10 because I'm not including the COVID year because the scheduling was askew. Who won their most recent race wire to wire? We had 2 of them, and those were both the eventual Triple Crown winners, Justify and American Pharoah. LRD is last race distance, so in terms of furlongs, so this Kentucky Derby was 10 furlongs. This Peter Pan was 9 furlongs, which is 1 mile and 1/8. Kentucky Derby 10, Kentucky Derby 10, Peter Pan 9, and so on. DSLR is days since last race. So the eventual Belmont Stakes winner, how many days ago was their most recent race before winning the Belmont Stakes? And if we average them all up, we get an average days since last race of 30. I also looked at the pedigree of each winner, the sire or father of each Belmont Stakes winner here, and the dam sire or the father of the mother of the horse, so the grandfather on the mother side essentially of each Belmont Stakes winner. And I just have a couple of comments about each year's running. So last year was ran at Saratoga, only going 10 furlongs instead of that traditional 12 furlongs. This was a COVID year and it was run at a 9 furlong distance with no Preakness in between. I believe the Preakness or maybe the Kentucky Derby got moved later, so the scheduling was askew. And here we have a couple of Triple Crown winners. Again, I'll add this file in the description below if you want to take a look for yourself, especially when next year comes around and we're back to a traditional 12 furlong race. So like last year, the Belmont Stakes in 2025 will be run at Saratoga Racetrack over a distance of 10 furlongs, which again is 1.25 miles, instead of the 12 furlong distance at Belmont Park. Due to renovations, they're remodeling some of the building and it's just not safe or well equipped to handle a big crowd and to run the races there, so that's why they're taking a break from Belmont Park. Because this year's Belmont Stakes will be at a new distance and track, I'm going to focus on 2 different variables when looking at this year's race. For qualitative purposes, who comes into this race and is ready to win, I will use the historical data I found for the previous 11 Belmont Stakes winners. This will include information mainly about race timing on the calendar, pedigree, and which races the previous winners ran in before the Belmont Stakes. For quantitative purposes, such as race fractions, times, lengths back, and variables that deal with the actual running, we will use last year's Belmont Stakes because it was also run at Saratoga going 10 furlongs, just like this year will be, as well as previous runnings of the Preakness Stakes because it will have some of the same runners as previous Belmonts, has the same restrictions, which is for 3-year-olds, and although the Preakness is 9.5 furlongs and not 10 furlongs like the Kentucky Derby and this year's Belmont will be, the field size in the Preakness is more comparable than the 20-horse field in the Kentucky Derby, which can ensure an exceptionally fast pace as well as more traffic issues and concerns. So I thought the Preakness was a more realistic representation of how the Belmont Stakes could actually play out. If you're interested, check within my playlist called the Kentucky Derby for race pace and track profiles of the other legs of the Triple Crown races. Also in my playlist, Big Race Breakdown, is where I have the Preakness breakdown with a file attached to it that you can look at for yourself. So looking at that year in the track column that I showed you in my file, each of the last 11 runnings have been on a fast dirt track, 100% fast track rating. I'm saying 11 because even though there were changing circumstances in 2 of the recent years, the weather in the area was consistent. Last year, the Belmont Stakes was run at Saratoga going 10 furlongs, and the COVID year was run at 1.1 miles. So I included the weather for those years, but for the run times, I did not include them in the overall Belmont Stakes qualitative measurements. Keep an eye on the weather forecast in Saratoga Springs, New York, leading up to the Belmont Stakes, which is going to be run this Saturday, June 7th. Take note of each horse's career performances and Tomlinson rating on a wet track should they experience some rain in the forecast. And if you're unsure of how to do this, you can see my video part 3 career performances and my how to read a racing form playlist for more information on how to read the Tomlinson ratings and career performances on a wet track. As of now, I don't expect them to get much, if any, rain going off my recent historical records of the Belmont Stakes, but weather is always something to keep an eye on when handicapping the races. So average fractions and finish times. The fractions are set by the leader at each call of the race, not the eventual winner unless that horse wins wire to wire. So when we're looking at the quarter mile times, the half mile times, they stop the stopwatch with the first horse that hits that half mile mark, 3/4 mile mark, not the eventual winner. Above, we can compare the pace of the Belmont Stakes when run 10 furlongs at Saratoga last year, which is the pink row, versus the average pace of the previous 11 traditional Belmont Stakes races at the very top, as well as the previous 7 9.5 furlong Preakness Stakes when run on a dry track in the very bottom row down here. The pace is much faster in the 10 furlong race, the pink row, versus the 12 furlong races throughout, but the slowdown rate is much higher due to the faster early pace, which is induced by the shorter race distance, with an exception between the half mile mark and the 3/4 mile mark when the race really picked up in the 10 furlong event. So if you look at the rate, remember that's the slowdown rate, and the 10 furlong Belmont Stakes last year, they actually sped up by almost a full second, whereas in the traditional Belmont Stakes, they slow down at this point by about 0.4 seconds, and in the Preakness Stakes, they slow down by about 0.72. So last year's Belmont Stakes, running this same distance and track as this year's will be, they actually picked it up quite a bit between the half mile and 3/4 mile mark. Surprisingly, last year's Belmont Stakes at 10 furlongs was run faster to the 1 mile mark than the average of the previous 7 9.5 furlong Preakness Stakes. The sample size is only 1 for the Belmont Stakes, being run 10 furlongs at Saratoga, but perhaps Saratoga plays more kindly to front runners than Pimlico's racetrack. As always, you must compare the merits of each horse in the field before clutching onto such assumptions. So the Preakness Stakes is a shorter race. You would expect a faster pace, but actually going a little bit longer, last year's Belmont Stakes at Saratoga was run faster than the average times for the Preakness Stakes. Compare the previous times of the horses in this year's Belmont Stakes and see how they compare with last year's running, as well as compared to the other horses in the field. So taking a look at lengths back, last year's Belmont Stakes winner at Saratoga going 10 furlongs was able to win, sitting much closer to the leaders with the pace faster than the averages for either the longer traditional 12 furlong stakes as well as the shorter 9.5 furlong Preakness Stakes. So again, last year's Belmont Stakes was run much faster than the average Belmont and the average Preakness, and the leader was still able to sit much closer on that Saratoga racetrack and go on to win. Of course, we only have one race as a sample size at Saratoga, going 10 furlongs for the Belmont Stakes, but treat this 2025 Belmont Stakes like a typical 10 furlong race that is being run at the Saratoga racetrack. Perhaps Saratoga is more favorable to frontrunners than Belmont or Pimlico, or perhaps this year's stalkers and closers will be superior than last year's 10 furlong Belmont Stakes closers. The quicker the race is through the first couple of quarter miles, the more likely it is the horses in front will get tired and be vulnerable to get past late in the race. Pace makes the race, so handicap accordingly. When the race is back at Belmont Park going 12 furlongs, we can revisit the overall trends for those 12 furlong races. So don't let the aura of the test of the champion fool you into thinking this is a true 12 furlong test. At the very bottom row, we have the averages for all the wire-to-wire winners from the past 11 Preakness Stakes. Last year's Belmont Stakes winner was not a wire-to-wire winner, but was able to sit within a half length of the leader throughout the race before taking the lead with about a quarter mile to go. The fractions for the wire-to-wire winners for the 9.5 furlong Preakness Stakes were run significantly slower over the Pimlico racecourse than last year's just off the pace Belmont Stakes winner. So if we just compare these fractions between the wire-to-wire winners at the Preakness versus last year's race overall, the wire-to-wire winners at Pimlico were much slower than last year's race overall. This might lend credence to my thought that Saratoga is a bit more speed-friendly of a racetrack than Pimlico. Take a look and see if there is a horse in this year's Belmont Stakes that could get away with leading the pack at a pace similar to the wire-to-wire winners in the Preakness. The only wire-to-wire winners in the last 9 traditional Belmont Stakes were Triple Crown winners. Those horses were standouts compared to the other 3-year-olds that year, so it's not often that you get a Belmont Stakes winner wire-to-wire. However, last year, with the new circumstances like we'll be seeing this year, they were able to sit within a half length throughout. So looking at the winner's previous race, 4 of the last 10 winners of the Belmont Stakes won their most recent start. I did not include 2020 due to some rescheduling with the calendar. The only 2 Belmont Stakes winners that won their most recent start wire-to-wire were those superior Triple Crown winners. On average, the Belmont Stakes winner's day since last race is 30 days. The only horse to win their most recent race before the Belmont Stakes, aside from the Triple Crown winners, was Archangelo in 2023 when he ran in the Grade 3 Peter Pan, coming off 28 days rest. 5 of the last 11 Belmont Stakes winners' most recent race was the Grade 1 Kentucky Derby, which equates to 45%. 3 of the last 11 Belmont Stakes winners came out of the Grade 2 and Grade 3 Peter Pan, which is 27%. And the Peter Pan got downgraded from a Grade 2 to a Grade 3, but it still serves as a very valuable prep race for the Belmont Stakes. And I'm just wondering, if might the 3 races in 5 weeks be too taxing for a horse like Journalism? The only horses that come out of the Preakness Stakes and win the Belmont Stakes were those Triple Crown winners, so they were kind of obligated to continue on the path to become Triple Crown champions. But that was just a question that arose because Journalism ran second in the Derby, ran in the Preakness Stakes, and had some hard-fought races there. And I'm just wondering, since coming out of the Preakness and winning the Belmont Stakes isn't traditionally a very common move, I just wonder if that does take a toll on Journalism in this year's Belmont Stakes. Taking a look at winner's pedigree, Tapit clearly has some influence on the Belmont Stakes winners, with 4 of the last 11 winners being sired by Tapit, which is 36%, and 1 more being out of a Tapit mare, so 5 of the last 11 have some Tapit in the immediate pedigree, which equates to 45%. A question for myself and everyone watching, is it more of a factor that his progeny tend to peak at this time of year during their 3-year-old campaigns, or is it that they truly relish the 12 furlong distance that much more than the 9.5 or 10 furlong distance, which is why you don't see so many Tapits winning the Kentucky Derby or the Preakness Stakes? Tapit-sired horses have a reputation for being a little bit quirky, so I wonder if their success in the Belmont Stakes is partly due to them learning how to be racehorses over time. Maybe they're just not ready in the first Saturday in May, but are a little more ready in the first Saturday in June, more often than not. Note that the 2 Belmont Stakes at shorter distances, highlighted in pink, do not have Tapit in the immediate pedigree. So now it's just some key takeaways, taking a look at the track. If the track does happen to be wet, see if your top selections have any success on a wet track, and or see if they have at least a high Tomlinson rating for a wet track, which is usually 320 or higher. History also points to the track being fast, so make sure to know if your top selection appears to do their best running on a wet track versus a fast track. Again, visit my How to Read a Racing Form playlist if you're unsure of where to find this information. Looking at fractions and finish times, since this race will be run over 10 furlongs, 1.25 miles, look for a horse that has shown it can handle this distance, has handled shorter distance with some apparent gas left in the tank. Also compare their fractions with the fractions of those previous stakes winners, just because the Preakness Stakes I think is a better comparison of this year's Belmont Stakes than say the Kentucky Derby, which again is the same distance, but just invites more chaos in terms of the pace as well as those traffic issues. Looking at lengths back, when we compare the winners of the 9.5 furlong Preakness Stakes, the eventual winner is on average within 1 length of the leaders 3/4 of a mile into the race. The more need the lead type horses in any given race, the greater the chances I give to some of those deeper closing type horses. So look at the racing form. If a lot of speed enters the race, you can kind of take horses that might be coming from further back. But if there's lone speed, you really want to take a close look and see if that horse can run pretty comfortably on the front end by himself and just lead them wire to wire. Looking at wire to wire winners, the only horses to win the Belmont Stakes wire to wire in the last 11 years were far superior and eventual Triple Crown winners. Of course, this Belmont Stakes will only be 10 furlongs, so horses with speed will have the shorter distance to their advantage. Looking at most recent race, the last 2 horses to come into the Belmont Stakes after winning the Preakness were on their way to becoming Triple Crown champions in years where they were the superior talent. Disregarding the COVID year when the scheduling was askew, the only other prep races for the Belmont Stakes aside from those Triple Crown winners was either the Kentucky Derby or the Peter Pan Stakes. Those races would put those horses days since last race between 27 to 35 days, and the average days since last race for the Belmont Stakes winners across the board is 30 days days over the past 11 years. So the Kentucky Derby and the Peter Pan Stakes races have been very productive prep races coming into the Belmont Stakes. Winner's pedigree: Tappet has certainly made a name for himself by either siring or producing the dam of the eventual Belmont Stakes winner. Again, 4 of the last 11 Belmont Stakes winners were sired by Tappet, while one other had the dam sire of Tappet. I'm asking everyone listening if you think this is a matter of Tappets preferring 12 furlongs, or if they have a tendency to peak in early June of their 3-year-old years. Either way, whether 10 furlongs or 12 furlongs, it would be wise to take note and at least get in the habit of looking at pedigrees before and after each race. Just some final thoughts: in the absence of several need the lead type horses entering the Belmont Stakes in 2025, it seems that with the new shorter distance, last year's winning profile over the Saratoga track, and the Preakness Stakes breakdown, it would be wise to strongly consider horses that have proven success near the pace at this distance on a fast track. Without seeing the entire field in racing form for the race, it would appear that the race shapes up nicely for Journalism, who is proven at this distance on a fast track and will not be hindered by a chaotic 19-horse field being led faster around than is ideal, like he experienced in the Kentucky Derby. Sovereignty and Baeza fit the pattern of horses that ran in the Kentucky Derby, rested through the Preakness Stakes, and ran in the Belmont Stakes, of which there were 5 out of the last 11 horses to win the Belmont Stakes doing this sort of pattern, which equates to 45%. Hill Road is the winner of this year's Peter Pan Stakes, which has been a productive prep race for the Belmont Stakes, so take a close look at Hill Road. And ultimately, look at each horse's careers leading up to this race and try to envision which horses are improving coming into this race and which horses may have peaked and might not run a top effort this time, perhaps due to overexertion, such as Journalism running these 3 tough races in a matter of 5 weeks, where Sovereignty and Baeza ran really well in the Kentucky Derby and took that extra time off, or Hill Road, who's coming out of that Peter Pan Stakes, which has been productive in the past. That's it for this video. It was kind of a different big race breakdown because we have the changing circumstances where it's being run at a shorter distance at a new track, but I hope that I provided some nugget of information out there that's useful for somebody. Either way, thank you for watching. Feedback is always appreciated, whether positive, negative. You have suggestions or recommendations, please leave them in the comments below. I'd appreciate it if anyone would like, subscribe, and or share this video with friends. My target audience is for folks that are relatively new to the sport, so if you do know someone who's interested in horse racing in general and want them to just get more familiar with the sport, I'd really appreciate it if you shared these videos with some of those people. I try to talk in a way that explains things clearly to people who may not be as familiar with the sport, so I hope I'm helping on that front. If you do know someone who's interested in the game and just wants to learn a little bit more about it, I have a couple of playlists dedicated to newcomers. One of them is How to Read a Racing Form, where I break down all the components of the racing form into small pieces, and I explain them very simply, I hope, and in ways that everyone can understand. I also have a playlist, Betting on Horse Racing, for people that finish the How to Read a Racing Form playlist, want to learn a little bit more about the betting side of things. I go into each bet that each track typically offers, talk about how much it costs, talk about how you can structure each bet, and talk about how much each bet is going to cost based on how you structure your ticket, and also some things that I look for before I decide on which bet I want to place and how I would structure the ticket accordingly. So those 2 playlists are good starting off points if you know anyone who's interested in the game but doesn't know a whole lot as of now. Coming up next, I'm probably going to do a race forecast on the Belmont Stakes. My race forecast playlist is where I look ahead to the race once the racing form comes out and dissect how I think the race is going to be run and who I think will eventually win the race. I also shared some ways I might play the race or bet the race. Other than that, I've been pondering doing a pedigree playlist where I'm going to look at some freshman sires or some sophomore sires who now have some young kids on the track that are getting into their first crop of runners and see what those runners are doing well, where they're excelling. One of the sires that I want to look at is a horse named Vekoma. I'm hearing a lot of buzz about this horse. I see some of his horses winning, and I just want to get a better sense of where they're excelling at, whether it's dirt, whether it's turf, whether it's an all-weather surface, and what types of distance they're thriving at. These are just some ideas I have for some upcoming videos. If anyone out there has any recommendations or suggestions or something they'd like me to cover, I'm all ears. Just leave me a comment. But either way, good luck in the Belmont Stakes coming up. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time.